One man lost nearly $8 billion, and you have been watching the thing he built your entire life. Every time something enormous happens somewhere in the world, a war starts, a tower falls, a country votes, a plane simply vanishes, you do the same thing everyone does. You reach for the remote and you turn to the news, as it happens. At any hour of the day or night, it feels so ordinary that nobody stops to ask a simple question. Where did this come from? Who decided the news should never stop, and why? The answer is a loud, reckless boy from the American South. A man who took over a company on the day his own father shot himself. A man who built the first channel that showed the news 24 hours a day, back when every expert in television swore it was insane, that no one would ever watch. This is his story. His name is Ted Turner. And it is not just a success story, because the fortune he built, he then lost, most of it in a single deal that he himself stood up and cheered for. More money, he later said, than almost anyone in the history of business. World's Richest brings you a story like this every single day. Real people, real fortunes, real empires, the way they were actually built, and the way they actually broke. If this is your first time here, do one small thing. Tap subscribe. It costs you nothing, and every episode hands you a story you have never quite heard before. First, let's look at the scale. At its peak, the empire this man built reached almost every home with a screen. CNN, the network that changed how the planet watches history. TBS, TNT, Cartoon Network, running in the background of a billion childhoods. Turner Classic Movies. He owned a baseball team. He owned the largest film library on Earth. Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz, thousands of titles. And in the year 2000, all of it was folded into the biggest corporate merger the world had ever seen. On paper, Ted Turner was worth around $10 billion, the single largest shareholder in the largest media company on Earth. 3 years later, most of it was gone. His fortune fell by roughly 80%, and he was pushed out of the company that carried his life's work. How does a story get from there to here? To understand it, we have to go back, all the way back to a boy, a billboard, and a gun. Robert Edward Turner III was born in 1938, and he grew up in the American South, mostly around Savannah, Georgia. His father sold advertising, billboards, the big painted signs along the highway. It was a real business, a self-made one, but it was not old money, and it was not the kind of world that opened doors in American television. Because in those years, television was a closed club, 3 networks: ABC, CBS, NBC. If you wanted to reach the country, you went through them, on their terms, in their time slots. A billboard man's son from Georgia was not invited, and Ted's father was hard on him. He sent the boy away to military school. He pushed him, criticized him, expected everything. Ted grew up loud, restless, desperate to prove something to a man who was never quite satisfied, and there was deeper grief in that house. When Ted was still young, his little sister fell sick and slowly died over years, and the God he had been raised to believe in never answered a single one of his prayers for her. He came out of that certain of only one thing. If anything in his life was ever going to be built or saved, he would have to do it himself. Then, in 1963, it all fell apart. His father had expanded too fast, borrowed too much, bought a company he could not comfortably afford. The debt frightened him. The depression took him. One morning he went upstairs and shot himself. Ted was 24 years old. What happened next set the pattern for everything that came after. The billboard company was about to be sold. It had already been agreed. And a grieving 24-year-old Ted Turner walked in and, against the advice of nearly everyone around him, tore the sale apart and seized control himself. His very first decision as a businessman was to refuse the safe exit and bet on himself instead. He would make that same choice again and again for the next 40 years. Sometimes it made him one of the richest men alive. In the end, it cost him almost everything. Turner took the billboard money and looked in a direction nobody respectable was looking: television, not the networks. He could never get in there, so he bought a small, failing station in Atlanta. Channel 17, the kind of station that showed old films, reruns, and wrestling to almost no one. He bought a second struggling station up in Charlotte too, and stitched them together with little more than nerve and borrowed money. Serious people thought it was junk, a dead-end signal for a dead-end business. Turner saw something else. He saw that he did not need permission from the networks to own a channel. He only needed a signal and an audience the big three had left behind. And then he saw the thing no one else in American television had truly understood: satellites. In 1976, Turner took his little Atlanta station and beamed its signal up to a satellite parked over the country. From there, cable systems anywhere in America could pull it back down and drop it straight into people's living rooms. One small local channel, suddenly playing everywhere at once. He called it a superstation, the first of its kind, and the beauty of it was simple. A satellite in the sky does not ask a network for permission. The signal comes down whether they like it or not. Turner had found a window the establishment could not close. He even bought a struggling baseball team, the Atlanta Braves, and put their games on that superstation, turning a local club into America's team, simply because his channel was the one playing everywhere. Content was oxygen. Turner grabbed every bit of it he could find. And now he was going to pull an entire industry through his window. The superstation made him rich, but it is not what he is remembered for, because Turner looked at that satellite pipe into every home and asked a question the networks thought was ridiculous. What if the news never stopped? At the time, news was a small thing, 30 minutes in the evening, read by a famous man behind a desk, and then it was over until tomorrow. Turner wanted news at 3 in the morning, news during breakfast, news the moment it happened, not the moment a network decided to show you. On the 1st of June 1980, he launched it, the cable news network, CNN. And the industry laughed out loud. They called it the Chicken Noodle Network. They said it would be bankrupt inside a year. For a while, they were almost right. It bled money. It looked cheap. Turner hired young reporters willing to work for almost nothing and pointed them at the world. He poured his superstation profits straight into the thing that was losing money. He was betting his entire fortune that the world would eventually want what he was building, even though it did not want it yet. He added a second news channel, the same headlines every half hour, around the clock. Critics kept writing his obituary. Turner kept the cameras on. He understood something they did not. The value of a channel that never sleeps is invisible, right up until the moment the world needs it. And then it is the only thing anyone is watching. And then the world gave CNN its moment. When a war broke out in the Gulf in 1991, CNN was the only network broadcasting from inside Baghdad as the bombs fell. 3 of his reporters stayed in a hotel as the city was attacked and described the flashes over the skyline into a telephone line, while the big networks cut to static. For the first time in history, people everywhere watched a war happen in real time, exactly as it happened, on a channel that never went dark. That was the night the joke died. Suddenly, every leader, every government, every ordinary family kept CNN glowing in the background, waiting. Turner had not just built a channel, he had built the world's nervous system for bad news. If something enormous happened anywhere on Earth, this was where you went. It is still where you go. By then, CNN was not just an American channel. Turner had planted bureaus across the globe and launched a version of it for the whole world, so a leader in one country could watch what a leader in another country was seeing at the exact same moment. Diplomats began calling it the CNN effect. Governments now reacted not in days, but in minutes, because the entire planet was watching the same feed at once. One restless man from Georgia had quietly rewired how the world learned what was happening to it. He even invented his own international sporting event to thaw the Cold War, flying athletes across enemy lines while his cameras rolled. Turner did not stop. He wanted more, and more meant content. In 1986, he bought the legendary Hollywood studio MGM for $1.5 billion. It was a staggering price, funded by a mountain of debt, and within months, it nearly destroyed him. The debt was so heavy that he was forced to sell most of the studio straight back, just 5 months later, for a fraction of what he had paid. But he kept the one thing he actually wanted, the film library, thousands of classic movies. He had almost gone bankrupt to own the past, and now he turned it into the future. From that library, he built TNT, then Turner Classic Movies. He bought a cartoon studio and built Cartoon Network. He even took the old black and white films and colorized them, splashing color across classics that purists begged him to leave untouched, and the fight over it ran in the papers for years. Turner did not care. To him, the library was not a museum, it was fuel. Channel after channel, he built an entire cable empire out of the movies everyone else had written off as finished. But the near disaster carried a hidden cost. To survive the debt, Turner had let cable partners take seats at his table. For the first time, Ted Turner did not fully own Ted Turner's empire. He barely noticed. He should have. By the early 1990s, Ted Turner was on top of the world. Time magazine named him Man of the Year. He married a movie star, Jane Fonda. He had already won the America's Cup out on the open ocean, sailing, earning himself the nickname Captain Courageous, and another that stuck even harder, the Mouth of the South. He said outrageous things. He picked public fights. He was impossible to ignore, and he liked it that way. He owned networks, a baseball team, and the attention of the entire planet. The loud billboard man from Georgia, the one the networks would not let through the door, had built something bigger than any of them, and that is usually where a success story ends. This one does not. Because Turner still wanted the one thing he had never truly had: protection, safety, an empire too big to ever be taken from him. So in 1996, he made a deal that felt like the crowning move of his life. He merged his entire company into Time Warner, the biggest media company on Earth. In one stroke, he became its vice chairman and its single largest shareholder. On paper, he was worth around $10 billion. He believed he was now untouchable, his life's work locked safely inside a giant. What he had actually done was hand the controls to someone else. He had a grand title and a mountain of stock, but the real power belonged to the men who ran Time Warner, and Turner's entire fortune was now tied to one thing he no longer controlled: the price of that company's shares. Inside the giant, Turner was restless from the very start. He had spent his whole life as the man who gave the orders, who bet the company on a whim and answered to no one. Now he sat in meetings where his ideas were heard politely and then set aside. He had traded the thing he loved most, control, for a number on a page, and that number was about to betray him. Then came the deal that gives this story its name. In January of the year 2000, the leaders of Time Warner announced they were merging with America Online, AOL, the giant of the early internet. It was the largest corporate merger the world had ever seen, valued at well over $100 billion. Old media and the new internet joined into something everyone believed would be unstoppable. And here is the part that still stuns people. Ted Turner, the largest shareholder in the entire company, was barely consulted. He learned it was happening only shortly before the rest of the world did, and still, he voted yes. He stood up and backed it with everything he had, saying he approved of the deal with all the excitement he had felt on his own wedding night. He thought it was the future. It was the single worst decision of his life. Because within months, the internet bubble burst. The new company's stock did not just fall. It collapsed. Hundreds of billions of dollars in value simply evaporated. And Ted Turner, who had been worth around $10 billion, watched his fortune crater by roughly 80%. Nearly $8 billion of his own money gone. Not stolen, not gambled away at a table. Lost in a single deal that he himself had cheered for. Later he would say it plainly, half joking and half broken. He had lost more money, he said, than almost anyone in the history of capitalism, and the money was only part of it. The men running the company stripped away his authority, one piece at a time, until his titles meant nothing at all. The man who had once bet his whole company on a hunch was now just a passenger, watching from the back seat as strangers drove his life's work into the ground. By 2003, he sold off his stock and walked away from the company that carried his name and his life's work. The founder of the world's news channel had been quietly written out of his own story. For a man who had spent his life as the loudest person in every room, the silence afterward was its own kind of loss. He still had money. A couple of $1 billion is not poverty. But he had lost the one thing he had been chasing since a hard father sent him away as a boy. He had wanted to build something that no one could ever take from him, and he had watched it be taken anyway. And yet, turn on a screen today, and Ted Turner is everywhere. CNN is still there, still the place the world turns the moment something breaks. TBS, TNT, Cartoon Network, Turner Classic Movies, all still running, still in your cable package, still on your phone. The empire outlived the man's control of it, and Turner himself did something surprising with what was left. He became the largest private landowner in America, tens of thousands of square miles of open country and bison. He gave $1 billion to the United Nations. He poured himself into saving wild land and endangered animals, gathering the largest private herd of bison in the world, as if a man who had lost one kind of empire had quietly decided to protect another. He grew old far from the newsrooms he had built, and he talked openly, often, about the deal that had cost him billions, never quite hiding how much it still stung. And in May of 2026, Ted Turner died at the age of 87. Here is the thing worth sitting with. The weakness that ruined Ted Turner was not bad luck. It was the very same thing that built him. His whole life, Turner won by betting everything. By taking on debt others would not touch, by trading a piece of control for a bigger stage. That instinct gave the world CNN. And that same instinct, step by step, gave away his empire. The billboard he refused to sell, the studio that nearly bankrupted him and let partners in, the merger that made him a giant's largest shareholder instead of his own boss, and finally, the deal that chained his entire fortune to a stock he did not control. One pattern, 2 decades. The same boldness that let him build an empire out of nothing is the exact boldness that lost it. And now, look again at the question we started with. Ted Turner built the machine that lets the whole world watch a disaster the instant it happens. He gave every one of us the power to see history unfold in real time, as it falls. And the one disaster he could not see coming, in real time, was his own. The man who put the world on the news never saw his own collapse until it was already over. He handed us a window onto everything and stood in front of the one window he could not look through. So the next time something enormous happens, a war, a crash, a night the whole world stays awake, and you reach for the remote and turn to the news, at any hour, remember where that came from. Not a network, not a committee. One loud, stubborn outsider from Georgia who was laughed at, who bet everything more than once, who changed how the entire planet sees itself, and who lost nearly $8 billion building the very thing that now sits, quietly glowing, in your living room. Ted Turner's story matters because it is bigger than one man. Before him, the news had an off switch, and 3 companies held it. After him, the news never stops, and it belongs to all of us. Every channel that runs around the clock, every phone that buzzes the second something happens, every rolling feed from every corner of the earth. All of it traces back to one man who looked at a satellite and saw a window nobody else could see. He proved it would work. Everyone else came after. These are the stories worth knowing. The ones that are not in the textbooks, that the headlines never quite finished telling, but that quietly shaped the world around you. That is what World's Richest does. Every episode, one real story, fully researched, no spin, just because you should know it. If tonight's story made you see something familiar in a new way, subscribe and send this to one friend who loves a story like this. It is free, and it is how we keep finding the next one.